and my title there is Senior Strategist. Well, what is a senior strategist? It's kind of a vague title that you wouldn't normally see in a news organization. And that's somewhat intentional. Basically, I'm the guinea pig in residence. My job is to spend time exploring new tools and methods for helping our journalists create better journalism, especially when it involves the public. NPR we're very proud to have an audience that is smart, that is worldly, that understands what's going on in the world. And we feel very strongly that it would be an enormous waste of resources and opportunity if we didn't interact with them. This is shaking for some reason. Let me see if I can stop this. That worked. Excellent. Right, it worked. Before coming to NPR, as Heidi mentioned, I used to run a nonprofit social network called the Digital Divide Network, which, as the name suggests, it focused specifically on trying to share strategies and methods of bridging the digital divide and improving media literacy around the world. So I got to travel a lot, did a lot of work with the UN, spent some time in North Africa, South Asia, and elsewhere. So when I came to NPR, I didn't come there as a journalist. In fact, I've never worked as a reporter in my life. I've written most of my career, I've done a couple of documentaries, but most of my efforts, since I got out of college in 1994, I focused on experimenting with online communities and how they can make a difference in the world. So as part of the Digital Divide Network, for example, I spent a lot of time working during natural disasters and trying to pull together experts and people on the ground who knew what was going on. So on September 11th, 10 years ago, during Katrina, the Boxing Day tsunami, the earthquake in Haiti, in each one of these cases, I would help mobilize communities to see what tools they could build, what rumors they could debunk. And so I came to NPR in 2006 with that kind of mindset that I don't know how to work without asking for help from people. And so, fortunately, NPR felt that would be somewhat interesting to have a guy like that, and so they called me a senior strategist, and I don't have to worry about banging into anyone else for the most part, and perhaps more importantly, they don't have to worry about banging into me. Because when you're doing this type of work, it's sometimes you just don't know what's going to work and how it's going to succeed and how it's going to fail. And earthquakes and other things that are actually of relevance in the world, and I discovered my first tweet was this. Watching Kaylee, my daughter, play in her exercise while Suzanne, my wife, rips up some pita for the hummus. And so, you know, the proverbial what am I having for dinner tweet or for breakfast, that's literally how I started. Second tweet, enjoying the hummus. But that's what Twitter was all about back then. It was a community of people, some who knew each other, some who didn't, who were kicking the tires and trying to see what it was all about. And so, for a while, I'd use it to chat with people, see what was going on in their areas, and use it to gripe a lot. So when I travel, I'd often seem to be on delayed flights, and so this seemed to become a pattern in my tweets for 2007. But this one in particular is interesting because I was en route to Denver's airport to fly back to DC from the holidays. And once again, my flight was delayed and I was stuck there for a few hours. And so while sitting there and looking at my phone, I heard the news that there had been an assassination attempt against Benazir. And for the first 30 minutes or so, no one on Twitter knew what was going on. Many people thought she was okay. Others thought that she'd been shot. Others thought that she'd been blown up by a bomb. And so, as I'm literally sitting at my gate with my family, I'm staring at, back then it was my Trio, because the iPhone wasn't out yet, trying to understand what was happening. And because of my previous work in different parts of the world with the Digital Divide Network, I was following people on Twitter in South Asia. And so because of that, they were able to watch local channels and pass along information like this to me, like when they announced her death on Pakistani TV. And that moment was a real revelation for me because, like I said, I'm stranded at an airport. Yet, I was able, with the assistance of just regular people I was following on Twitter, to keep tabs with what was going on practically on a minute-by-minute basis. Any news site that was doing a live blog or a chat session about what was going on in Twitter Square, as the BBC, The Guardian, and Al Jazeera and the members were. No one can count the number of words they use. When you watch Anderson Cooper doing incredible coverage, Ben Wiedemann and others on CNN, no one was keeping track of how many words or how many minutes they were on air, because clearly this was a big story that needed to be covered. I was basically doing the same thing on Twitter. What had started essentially as a hobby of mine, following what had happened in Tunisia, I suddenly found myself serving as a form of anchor on Twitter. And by following all these people and having them talk back to me often in real time, I realized that I had achieved a form of situational awareness that I probably couldn't have achieved if I'd been standing somewhere in Twitter Square. Now, there was no way to know because I hadn't been over there. I had never done that kind of reporting. Because once again, I am not a reporter. But nonetheless, because of the source network that I had built on the ground using Twitter, at any given moment, I could picture in my head or on a map who was where and what was going and how the tide was turning one way or another. And so that was easy. January 25th is what they called it because that's when it started. But as soon as Mubarak fell, you started hearing others. February 14th, Bahrain. February 17th, Libya. February 19th, Algeria. February 20th, Morocco. Yemen, Syria. They were starting too, but they didn't choose a date for their hashtags. That's fine. But nonetheless, it was happening everywhere suddenly. And it was at this point I started removing meetings off my Outlook calendar. Because I made the mistake of saying during Tunisia, if this spreads anywhere else, I'll cover it as best I can. And the next thing I knew, there were half a dozen, anything from protests to full-blown revolutions sparking in that part of the world. And so, how on earth was I going to balance this? Fortunately, I am lucky that I work for NPR, because I had an executive come up to my desk after people had noticed I hadn't done any work in a couple weeks. And they leaned over my desk and said, I don't completely understand what you're doing, but please keep doing it. And I haven't done my usual day-to-day job activities since. I have spent basically full time, and when necessary, 7 days a week, focusing on the Arab Spring. Fortunately, even though this was happening in many places at once, things ebb and flow, of course, and it allowed me to concentrate in different places. So let's start with Libya, for example. I had heard about the plans to start the protest about 4 or 5 days before it started. And so as soon as we began seeing tweets about it and seeing videos, I started asking if anyone else had seen the videos and what they thought of them. So for example, can you translate and or recognize Libyan accents? You have to remember, in mid-February, there weren't any Western reporters in Libya. And Libya doesn't have a tradition of protest, nor does it have a tradition of transparency. So for some of the videos that just vaguely showed people protesting with no obvious signs of Gaddafi imagery or anything, there were some in the media, and certainly many members of the public, who were skeptical that something big was happening there. But by asking this question on Twitter, I would have Egyptians and Tunisians come out of the woodwork, and they'll say things such as, I recognize that accent, it's East Libya, it's probably Benghazi. I recognize what that scene looks like, I'm pretty sure that's the coronation to Tobruk. And then someone else might say, oh, no, that can't be Tobruk. See that statue in the corner? That's on the coronation Benghazi. This is taking place in Benghazi. And as I saw this conversation emerging, I realized that I had followers who had expertise that I could never imagine for myself. And so suddenly, my understanding of myself as like a Twitter anchor really changed, because rather than having editors and producers and pundits and others sitting with me at, or behind the camera at a news studio with my earpiece on, looking at a variety of streams and screens, I didn't have any of that. I had TweetDeck and I had my tweets. And my tweets were actually with my editors, my producers, my researchers, my translators, pretty much everything else. And they were very eager to work with me. And that's what they've been doing 7 days a week since then up until this very day.